Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 19th, 2025, and boy, does everything sound very strange today. I don't know. We've been fooling around with the knobs and the buttons and the levels to try and make things right. On the podcast, when we speak with Greg Dworkin, except, of course, we're not going to be speaking with Greg Dworkin today, but we're trying to fool around and make sure we could get the music piped out, and I think I've got that problem solved. Of course, he's not here to tell me whether that's actually the case or not today. But in the meantime, this new settings has left me with a strange and unusual sound in my headphones. It's a very deep and, it's nice. It's a deep and resonant sound, but it sounds a little hot to me. And Justice says, everything's fine, everything's working. It may be a little bit hot. I wonder if I can work on the settings here. There were a few. Maybe I wonder what I left set for the audio. I think I found the source of the problem and have changed the microphone input on Zoom, which should not matter at all right now, which is why it's so odd. And I wonder if I switched over to the noise removal. Well, Zoom isn't doing anything right now, so I don't know. All right. Well, too bad, and we'll have to work on some other levels during the breaks today. But I think everything's fine. The music's working. The voice is here. And what's making it seem so muddled? Well, I just really don't know. But maybe it always was, and I didn't realize it. Well, push some more buttons during the next couple segments. But in the meantime, it is Friday. Gateway to chaos. Every day is really a gateway to chaos. But today is, of course, gateway to Trumpian chaos. I don't know what's on his schedule. But let's see, there's been a major drop in volume when it came on, but it's not lowering now. So, all right, well, I haven't actually pushed any of the buttons except to turn down the volume control knob on the microphone itself. So, I don't know. We'll keep working with it and seeing what we can do. And, of course, those of you listening via podcast, what do you care? Because we're going to fix all of that by that time. All right, so let's see. Back over to... what the hell we were talking about today? Oh, yes, right. Gateway to chaos. I don't know what his schedule is for the weekend and whether he is headed to Florida. All right. One thumbs up from Mom. Everything says she says it sounds fine. So we'll just go ahead and get used to the new sound in my head. And maybe it is all in my head. We don't know. Maybe all of this is in my head. There's no real reason to believe that a president of the United States would behave this way. The way I'm about to reveal to you for the first time, at least in the first time today. But of course, every day is like this. So I don't know whether he's headed to Florida and whether or not that means a flight, which means free form blabbing to the press in which he'll announce some, crazy new program that he never bothered to mention to anyone until the minute he conceived of it and then said it was already done, like $1,776 checks to every member of the military, which I'm glad that, by the way, we read extensively from Defense One yesterday, which has the very plausible, I think, explanation for the source of the money, which, constitutionally we couldn't really quite figure out. What do you mean you're sending $1,776 checks to people? You got to draw money from the Treasury. You're going to need an appropriation for that. Could you be reprogramming funds from elsewhere? Maybe, but probably not that much, that quickly, and without any notice to anyone else anywhere in the government. Seems unlikely. And then we found out, at least the working theory is, the best one I've seen is the one from Defense One, which says that they're taking the basic allowance for housing, BA, I love that, and just declaring that money, the money that was destined for the BA payments, and I guess an increase in those payments, and rebranding it the warrior dividend and giving it to people, but giving it to people with no respect whatsoever for what needs they have for housing. And also, it's the same pot of money. They're not getting a housing allowance adjustment plus a $1,776 bonus. They're just getting the one, even though he went on the air and made it sound like he was doing two. But what's the only reason I bring this back up, because I think we made it pretty clear yesterday. One, you may not have listened yesterday. But two, since then, several times, I guess, as reporters have addressed the issue with him in, shouted questions during his Oval Office press sprays or availabilities or whatever they call these things these days, and asking about them. And he has said, no, this is coming from the tariffs, the tariff shelf. He's convinced himself that we've taken in trillions of dollars in tariffs, all paid for by other countries. Americans aren't paying a dime. Also not true. And that but this is like the sixth or seventh program that he's announced, a major expense, and said, well, look on the tariff shelf, which, what, you keep money on the shelf? You don't. But, whatever, you think you do. And I guess he just says, look on the tariff shelf, and that's a cue to all of his minions. Find some way of funding this thing and just tell him it was the tariff shelf. Just don't argue with him. Just tell him it was the tariff shelf. So he thinks he's paying the $1,776 bonuses. First of all, he thinks he's paying them, and I'm not certain that he is. Second, he thinks he's paying it out of tariff money and, whatever. But he keeps insisting that that's the source of it. And so, I guess it has to continue to be a story. The search for what is the source of this funding? Is it real? How is it happening? Where is the money coming from? And why does the president keep insisting that the money is coming from someplace it's not coming from? It's an issue. It's a story. It's constitutional and its implications, but it can't be the craziest thing today. Just like yesterday, we weren't sure which is going to be the craziest story, and he kept doing things weirder and weirder and weirder. And we ended up on the plaque story. I guess Greg decided the plaques underneath all of the portraits of the presidents on the stupid invention Walk of Fame thing. Trump is so weird. That was like the most alarming story of where he is mentally, dementia-wise, etc. It's a good argument. Now, I ended up we talked all about that. We talked all about, what else did we hit yesterday? It's hard to remember what we hit yesterday on the show and then what happened, what developed after the show. And I think after the show, what developed was that we'll do this one. The board of the Kennedy Center, the John F. Kennedy Center Center for the Performing Arts the board has said, we're changing the name of the place. Naturally, I mean, Trump himself has been referring it to this way for weeks now, and then saying, oops, I mean the Kennedy Center. But he's been referring to it as it really is the Trump Kennedy Center, because I've done such a magnificent job in changing the place and fixing it. It was so horrible that I put my name on it, and I'm fixing it now. And anyway, look, so then the announcement was made that the name was purported to have been changed. The board met and voted. Well, before I even get to any of that, Trump reacted to, I'm so honored. I'm deeply honored. And I'm surprised they did it. I'm just so honored. But like I said, he's been referring it to that way himself for a week, making it very clear to the board, such as it is, that this is something he wanted, something he had assumed had already been done, probably. I'm surprised by it. Well, whatever. Anyway, secondly, the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, like a lot of weird things in Washington, it's not a private place that somebody built and said, this is what I'm going to name it. It's a quasi-public institution. It is chartered by Congress. It took an act of Congress to create it, an act of Congress to name it. It was actually probably the same act of Congress. They probably took care of business all in one bill. So that, in other words, changing the name of it now should, in fact, require another act of Congress. Not that he couldn't get that act out of this Congress, but he hasn't. Secondly, Caroline Leavitt, I guess in between Botox injections, made an appearance to I think she may have done this one on social media and typed it all out and saying, our fabulous president has won this tremendous honor in a unanimous vote by the board of the Kennedy Center. Which, again, it wouldn't matter how many votes they got at the Kennedy Center. This takes an act of Congress to rename the thing. But, here we are, Gulf of America, Secretary of War, Trump Kennedy Center. It's just one of those things that he's going to force the media to say, and then people will start saying it. And, it'll probably work, too, for the time being. I'm sure it'll be changed back later, but whatever. Anyway, more interesting still, I thought, was the news that the board vote might not really have been a thing at all. Let me open this up. I grabbed a post from Blue Sky, which summarizes things pretty quickly. I think if we can just get it to open here. Zach Everson. Zach is a reporter at Forbes magazine. And, look, there's a little extra here. Investigating how Donald Trump turns political power into personal profit, as well as other stories at the intersection of money and politics. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Anyway, Zach Everson, I guess, has found one of those little intersections. This an X post by Representative Joyce Beatty. Now, Joyce Beatty, I'm not familiar with offhand, but I see a picture over here which would indicate that she is a representative from Ohio. You see the really fancy, cool-looking, somewhat weird-looking, somewhat cringe-looking, if you ask me, Ohio state flag. But I love it. I love it. It's a little cringe, but I like these wacky state flags. Very boring ones. Well, enough with that. This is unique. So she's from Ohio, and she, ex officio, as they say, that is to say, by virtue of the fact that she is a member of Congress, she's eligible for one of several seats. The Kennedy Center website was just about crashing yesterday with people looking up who's on this board that would unanimously vote for him. Now, mind you, Trump, as president, is entitled to a great degree to clean house over at any place, even including the Kennedy Center. There's really no reason why he should be able to do that. But reform the board and nominate friends, acquaintances, relatives, and that's what he's done. He's packed the place with accomplices, essentially, and there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't, in fact, vote for something dumb like this. And it's not all that unusual either. It's among the things the president can appoint people to. But there are also members of Congress. Part of the board is reserved, essentially, for members of Congress who are named usually by this, by lists submitted by the speaker and the minority leader, and they, sort of pro forma. Give me your list. You get 10 and we get 12, or maybe it's even an equal number. And, whatever. They put it through in a suspension bill. These are your 10. These are our 10. La-di-da. They're going to be on the board of the Kennedy Center. I'm sure it's a fine job and a fun job. Anyway, Joyce Beatty is among them. And she was just wanted to point out, for the record, as that's in fact how her post on X begins. For the record, this was not unanimous, right? Of course, Caroline Leavitt has to come on there. First of all, lie that the place has been renamed because it takes an act of Congress and it didn't have one, and that it was a fantastic idea, that Trump's a great president, the Kennedy Center is doing terrific, and that the board was unanimous in its decision, because who could be against this? And for most of the board, they can't be, because they'll be killed if they are. But for the rest of them, Joyce Beatty says, for the record, this was not unanimous. They held a meeting by phone call, phone conference, apparently. And she says, I was muted on the call, not like accidentally, I left my mute button on. She was muted. They muted her and everybody else. I was muted on the call and not allowed to speak or voice my opposition to this move. Also, for the record, this was not on the agenda, which for a public or quasi-public body like this usually means, in regular parliamentary terms, that if it's not on the agenda, it takes at least a vote of some kind, if not a suspension of the rules, to allow a new item up for consideration. The idea, of course, being if you need to consider it, in order to have a vote on it, it has to be on the agenda so that all members of the board have advance notice of what's going to be voted on so they don't accidentally miss an important vote. So there you go. It wasn't on the agenda, which usually in the Administrative Procedures Act world means that it's wasn't eligible for a vote. And also it doesn't even matter if they did have a vote because it's supposed to take an act of Congress. But then to go around bragging that it was unanimous because you bound and gagged everybody who might say no, well, that's just par for the course for the Trump regime, I guess we'll say. Here's Caroline Leavitt's post about it. I have just been informed that the highly respected board of the Kennedy Center, whom we've bound and gagged, some of the most successful people from all parts of the world, have just voted unanimously to rename the Kennedy Center to the Trump Kennedy Center because of the unbelievable work, well, I guess it is that, of President Trump. And it is hard to believe the work of President Trump, isn't it? I wonder if the Kennedy Center website is less congested this morning. No, it's not. It's interesting to take a look at the board. I recommend it to you, and it's the Kennedy Center, I guess, .com. But right now I'm in the queue here. Number of users in line ahead of me is 2. Everybody's looking at the board. It's an amazing thing. I guess I'll leave it open and see if it comes up. But, here we go. So there's honorary chairs, and there's then the actual center board of trustees, and then a couple. So the honorary chairs, Melania Trump, how did she swing that? But also Dr. Jill Biden, Michelle Obama, Laura Bush, and Hillary Rodham Clinton. Who do what's the list? Who are honorary chairs? Former first spouses, I guess. In addition, the actual board of trustees. Now, this is an unusual thing. Usually you don't see this. The chair of the board, of course, President Donald J. Trump. Usually, too busy with this. The president of the board is Richard Grenell. Used to be his ambassador at large all over the place, MAGA super operator behind the scenes. Jennifer Fisher, who I don't know, vice chair. Sergio Gore, the secretary, is a name I've seen in White House circles for some time. John Falconetti, treasurer. Elliot Burke, general counsel. Don't know those guys. Members appointed by the President of the United States is the next section here. But I guess I won't do everybody, although there's Sergio Gore on it as well. But I guess, do they put you in both? Yeah, I guess they do. So Trump is on it. Maria Bartiromo. I don't know who Brian Ballard is. I'll skip the ones I don't know offhand, but Pam Bondi is on it. Why? Who knows? Elaine Chao, still involving herself with this idiot. Elaine Chao is on there. A Pamela DeVos. Pamela DeVos. Gee whiz. Yeah, DeVos. Okay, sure. Amelia May Fanjul. Fanjul is a name you recognize from South Florida. I think that's the Domino Sugar Fanjul Cuban-American mega donors. Lynette Freese, I guess, is that spelled like Foster Freese? So, I imagine that's the connection there. Lee Greenwood, who I guess joined the board and then gave himself an honors. Laura Ingraham. Let's see. Mindy Levine, who I think is Mark Levine, right-wing podcaster guy's relative. I'm not sure who's Allison Lutnick. Anybody heard of the Lutnick family, right? Secretary of Commerce, his wife, Dan Scavino, Sherry Summerall, which remember we learned from the recent reminder from the profile of Susie Wiles that Susie Wiles is herself a Summerall, Pat Summerall's daughter. So gee whiz, another Summerall is on there. Of course, President Donald J. Trump, Usha Vance, then Susie Wiles herself, and then the last entry was interesting. Paolo Zampoli, a longtime member of the Trump Rogues Gallery years and years ago, and during the 2016 campaign, we read all about Paolo Zampoli. He, really moving in the same circles as, what's the guy's name? John Casablancas from Elite Modeling and Jeffrey Epstein. I'll add that name. These were the gang of guys running around New York, starting their own modeling agencies so they could, have access to people who wanted to be models and use that influence and leverage over them to, get them to take all their clothes off. Paolo Zampoli one of the originals from that gang, and now has kind of moved into the passport sales to billionaires game for the island nation of Dominica, and still hanging around New York. And also rumored to be the guy who introduced Melania to Donald Trump. Then, of course, the ex officio members designated by act of Congress. There are many of them. Let's see. Robert F. Kennedy, of course, Jr. on the board. Marco Rubio, Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C. It's interesting. They have a TBD for the director of the National Park Service. Linda McMahon is on it. Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries by virtue of their positions. John Thune and Chuck Schumer similarly. And then 5 members of the House and 5 senators. Not superstar names or anything like that in the House. In the Senate, we know everybody. So Sheldon Whitehouse, Shelley Moore Capito, Mark Warner, Chris Van Hollen, Susan Collins. She's very concerned about the whole thing, though. I will, point that out. So that's what the board is like. So, do you think that the entire board was okay with, renaming it the Trump Center? There was going to be no votes, you would think, from, maybe Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Sheldon Whitehouse, Mark Warner, maybe. Chris Van Hollen, right? He would have voted no, probably. But they either didn't go or they were all muted. So I thought that was somewhat interesting. Small bore story, but big enough that you can blab about it for 20 minutes if you want to. Another small bar story. We'll do these in the first segment. I think I made mention of this a couple of days ago, but I guess it's now official according to Gizmodo. And to the extent that Gizmodo can make anything official, why not? Sad news for listeners to KITM. Your Trump cell phones, the T1, the golden cell phone. It is in fact actually supposed to be, gold toned, but made in America. All by American labor and all American parts, because F all those other countries plus tariffs, and we make things here in America because we can totally do it. And if we put a big enough tariff on things, we can move these industries to this country. This was really, basically, they didn't say as much, but I guess it was supposed to be the test case for can we tariff our way back to, greatness, manufacturing greatness, by putting enough tariffs on. Now you can't import your phones from, you can, but just it's very expensive. Import your phones from China, but our phones will be cheap because there won't be tariffs because they'll be made here in America, and we can totally do it for a competitive price. And they can't, and they won't. And guess what? The Trump phone delivers on its promise of being complete and utter bullshit. That is. And yeah, I know. I did it. I could have used Greg's recording of it. What is it?
That's bullshit.
And it has the little, censoring horn in there. But we're going to skip it for today. But guess what? It's really true. Trump Mobile insists that you have instead a little refurbished phone as an appetizer to the T1. People paid $100 in advance as a down payment on these phones, and they were promised them months ago. And then it was, a few more months, and then it was like, definitely for Christmas. And now people are, hanging on for Christmas. No, you will not have your Christmas miracle. So James Perro writes this thing for Gizmodo with just at this point, a week until Christmas less now. It looks like you won't be giving the mega MAGA fan in your life that shiny new golden Trump phone of their heavily misguided dreams. The T1, not the Terminator thing, but the phone. The T1, Trump Mobile's phone for Americans, as they put it, is still floating in the star-spangled ether, which means anyone dumb, patriotic enough to put down $100 on an obvious knockoff will have to wait to receive their very much not made in America device. In the meantime, the old story being, we don't have the factories that can build this thing. We don't have the parts to build this thing. We don't have the raw materials to build this thing. So they kept giving themselves little exemptions. But, again, it was supposed to mean that a mega plant was going to be built somewhere and they're going to employ Americans to make these phones. And they just didn't. And there's nobody who's even dug a foundation for a plant to build it. They're just not doing it. But anyway, the more practical applications for right now is this. There are other options. Ken, Don Jr., and Eric Trump, who are running Trump Mobile's totally above board, tip-top operation. Can they perhaps interest you instead in let's say, a refurbished Samsung Galaxy S24 or an iPhone 15? Remember, they're on 17 now. Is that right? I think. Perhaps for a price, let's say, that's actually higher than what you can currently buy a new iPhone 15 for from Best Buy. No, it's a good deal, though. Trust them. So, it's the Suns running this, and basically everybody who said, yeah, I'll pay $100 to reserve one of these phones, gave $100 to these idiots, and they're keeping it. But, if you're angry and you need a phone, they do offer this. The Apple iPhone 15 Renewed, as they call it, isn't just another smartphone. It's a bold step toward wireless independence, reads the description on the Trump Mobile product page of for the aforementioned refurbished iPhone 15. Apple iPhone 15 Renewed delivers top-tier performance, sleek design, and powerful features, all without the inflated price tag. But also with, I guess I would have to add, the inflated price tag, because you can buy them for less at Best Buy. Anyway, so there you go. Anyway, nothing really happens. It was supposed to sell for $499, but there's no factory in America, literally no factory in America capable of making this thing yet. And they haven't even built, that's not that they've built the factory and they're hiring feverishly. They haven't even started. But there you go. And they do say, given the fact that both Trump brothers are heavily invested in the crypto space, where dubious business practices feel more like the modus operandi than an icky anomaly, trying to hawk a 3-year-old refurbished iPhone for an inflated price almost feels cute in comparison. How do you like that? Well, disappointing us all again, except you didn't do this.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I wish I could understand exactly what was going on with the sound in my headphones, but everything, I need to stop obsessing about it and just get used to this being, I guess, the new normal. Speaking of the new normal, there are so many other stories that I have to bring to your attention, and now it's kind of time to switch over gears to the larger stories. I mentioned at the close of the show yesterday, and I hope you had a chance to read it, and I hope it doesn't bore you, therefore, if you have already read it, that we discuss it here. And the New York Times report yesterday, now getting slightly more attention. The piece entitled begins with a quote from Trump. Who's going to stop you? Listen, if you will, to Trump press Georgia speaker over 2020 vote. During much of the 12-and-a-half-minute call, President Trump reiterated his claims that he had won Georgia, a state he lost by more than 11,000 votes that year. You all know very well, I think, at this point about his call to Brad Raffensperger in January, early January of 2021, and their attempt to get them to basically say, don't certify the Electoral College votes for Georgia. Do something else. Certify them for the electors for Donald Trump. Just, well, I can't do that. You didn't win it. Well, if you found 11,000 more votes for me, then you would. And, why don't you go do that? We heard about that one, but there was an earlier call, about a month earlier, as early January 2020, in which Trump calls the Speaker of the State House of Representatives, or was it the Senate leader? House of Representatives, and says, I want you to call a special session of the Georgia State Legislature to declare something's amiss and that you will be withholding the but is that, well, I guess at this point they haven't had the meeting of the Electoral College yet. It's about a week away. But basically, we found maybe fraud and we're uncovering it, and hold on here, and we're going to use this was when the prevailing theory was that the state legislatures could simply ignore the vote, the popular vote in their state, and exercise their constitutional prerogative to appoint electors on behalf of the state of Georgia rather than have the people vote and elect them at large, which is a thing that states can do. But generally speaking, it would be at the minimum poor form to say we're going to have a national popular election and you will all have a say, and we're going to go through the expense and the charade of having a vote, but then we're going to ignore what your ballots say and instead exercise a totally different, valid, but totally different power that we didn't tell anybody we were going to use until we found out that the power we said we were going to use didn't work out the way we wanted it to. It would be cheating, of course. I think at the time we kind of discovered, well, there's nothing in the text of the Constitution that says you can't bait and switch, but presumably it was the intention of the founders to say, you will select a method. You have the latitude and the prerogative to select a method, but then you select it and then you execute it. You can't select it, decide you don't like the outcome, and then change the method. But because no honorable person would ever have done such a thing at the time, they didn't write that down. So, well, there you go. So Trump figured he could get every state where there was a Republican majority, especially in both houses, I guess, of the legislature, where he didn't win the vote, to, just do the game that he's playing now. You have the ability to, determine on your own that you will meet and that this will be on the agenda. And if you say that you think actually, it doesn't really matter why you do it, but if you declare, we're no longer going to have the election results determine who our electors are, the state legislature reserves that prerogative for itself, even though we already held the vote. If you say that and then execute that, it would be very difficult in time, anyway, to get judges to say anything otherwise. Well, no, you said you were going to have an election. You really needed to stick by that. Why? Where does it say we have to do that? Well, general principles of fairness. Well, maybe, but that decision isn't going to be made before December 14th when the Electoral College meets, nor probably before January 20th when the president is inaugurated. So go F yourself. Not to mention, of course, January 6th when they count the vote. Why leave January 6th out of any of this? So now, of course, that's the way Trump runs his administration here. What does it take in order for me to have legal basis to blow up boats off of Venezuela? And by the way, we've blown up another 5 or so in the last 2 days. And most of them are in the Pacific off Colombia. And why he's leaving Colombia's name out of this thing, I really don't know. But anyway, what does it take to have legal basis for it? Well, if they were terrorists, we could. Well, how do you make someone into a terrorist? Who has to fill out what form? Oh, you can make a presidential determination that they're a terrorist. Oh, can I? All right, well, then I do. Now, normally, there's reams of evidence, good or bad, fabricated or not. Reams of evidence are compiled into printed form and waved around in front of a committee of Congress, and this is the president's determination. But Trump and paperwork, they're not doing it. So anyway, this was just an early invocation of this same principle. Why don't you guys just declare me the winner? Anyway, I don't think we knew about this call for some reason, or maybe we knew about the call, but we didn't have a recording of it. Richard Fawcett and Danny Hakim, though, are the first for the New York Times to get a hold of this thing in a newly obtained recording of a phone call from late 2020. President Trump could be heard pressing the Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives to hold a special legislative session to overturn Mr. Trump's election loss. And you can listen to the whole thing, and it's 12 and a half minutes, and I suppose it wouldn't violate any copyrights to play it. It would just bore you to tears. So we'll stick with their recitation of what happens. After citing, of course, false conspiracy theories of election fraud in Georgia, Mr. Trump told David Ralston, the speaker at the time, in this call on December 7th, anything else going on December 7th you should be paying attention to? December 7th, 2020, that he could justify calling a special legislative session by saying it was, quote, for transparency and to uncover fraud. Just say it, and that would be enough. Mr. Trump added, who's going to stop you for that? And he's probably right about that. Then one would say, we would say, this isn't about fraud. This is just about reversing the election results. But they wouldn't listen to us. Could they have called this special session? Maybe. But Ralston is not totally convinced. But Trump is. Trump just says, well, just call it. You're the speaker. Command people to come back. And, well, you'll see later on that they say, well, who's going to stop you for that? And Mr. Ralston, a Republican lawyer who died in 2022. And, I don't know how. Did he fall out of a window in Kyiv? No, but he's dead. Anyway, Mr. Ralston, who was alive at the time, responded with a chuckle. Who's going to stop you for that? A federal judge, possibly. Yeah. Which Trump didn't imagine. Of course, now he just says, well, like Emil Bove says, you'll just have to tell the judge to go F himself. But even then, I'm sure even without using that phrasing, Trump was like, what's that federal judge is going to stop you? He's not going to stop you. We'll appeal. All right, whatever. But this turned out to be a workable legal theory. You just appeal everything, no matter how ridiculous, and drag it out to the point where now it's too late. He's the president, then we can't charge him for anything or whatever. I mean, by the way, it wasn't until much later that he got, handed total immunity for almost everything ever by the Supreme Court. But suppose that they had accelerated that a little bit and had that question in front of them a little earlier. Donald Trump succeeds in convincing Mike Pence to say he won. And then people sue, and the Supreme Court says, he did win. And as a matter of fact, if you think he didn't, and you think he cheated, you can't prosecute him for it anyway because immunity. So anyway, who knew that was going to work out that way? Federal judge isn't going to stop you. Go ahead. The New York Times obtained a recording of the call on Wednesday. It's a 5-year-old call, but we've obtained it on Wednesday. It's part of a trove of investigative documents generated in a recently dismissed criminal election interference case. It's dismissed. Where was this? Georgia, of course. Brought against Mr. Trump and 18 of his allies by Fannie T. Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. A state judge last month dismissed the case, which focused on Mr. Trump's efforts to stay in power after the 2020 election. Ms. Willis and her office had been removed from the case by the Georgia courts last year following revelations that she had a romantic relationship with the lawyer she had hired to oversee it. A great mistake, of course, but I think this thing was destined for dismissal anyway. But I guess the new part of it is, well, if the whole case is falling apart, I guess the prosecutor no longer has to hide this from view, lest the case be compromised in some way. Although I would have thought that the Georgia prosecutor would have said, well, if we're not bringing the case, then no point in releasing evidence against a person either, and it would just be prejudicial. But there it is. Now, the case met its final end on November 26th of this year when a replacement prosecutor for Willis determined that the charges should not have been brought. Of course, here's the evidence, of course, that it should have been brought. But what difference does that make? During much of the 12.5-minute call, they say 12.5, interestingly, minute call with Mr. Ralston, Mr. Trump went through his claims that he had won Georgia, a state he lost by more than 11,000 votes that year. Some of his exaggerations baldly, but also badly, defied the reality on the ground. We won this thing by 400,000 or 500,000 votes, he told Mr. Ralston, just like we did Alabama and every other state in the South. And we won your state massively. They took votes away. By what a case he puts together, don't you think? who could blame him for coming away from some of these conversations with the impression that if I declare it, it is so? Because he's doing a terrible job declaring it, and yet there are people saying, I'll just tell people it's true. You know, we won by 400,000, maybe 500,000, maybe 1.5%. Just like everything. We won massively. They took votes away. Who, where, when, how, why? Nothing. Mr. Trump referred to debunked conspiracy theories about voter fraud taking place at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta. You remember these? Where some claimed something nefarious was happening with ballots being stored in bins. Remember, he said in the call that votes were, quote, coming out of suitcases, luggage, and it was a lot of votes. It was probably more than 100,000. You know, they ran them through 3 or 4 times, the same votes. None of this even remotely true. Of course, I mean, if you were really trying to examine this thing forensically, you'd be like, well, these votes, they came out of luggage. What difference does it make what kind of container they came out of? Well, that's supposed to be circumstantial. Why would you have ballots in a suitcase? I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, that's not what I would think they would normally contain ballots in. But 1, they weren't in a suitcase. And 2, if they were, then you'd say, well, that's an interesting question. It's, I guess, circumstantial evidence. That seems like the kind of container that an official vote wouldn't actually be held in. Can we get an answer on that? And all that proves is, well, in the end, it's evidence. It's circumstantial evidence at that. What does it prove? It proves nothing more than an unusual container was used to transport these ballots. What does that mean? Nothing. What do you want it to mean? Well, if it was unusually transported, then that means it could have been open to the chain of custody is open to question, and therefore there could have been cheating. Maybe. Can you prove that the chain of custody was broken? Because, like, if you can say the chain of custody was perfect, but the box broke, so they used a suitcase, is that proof of anything? Nope, it's not. So, I mean, it goes nowhere from the beginning. Never mind that he was misdescribing what was happening. And then but just for good measure, they ran him through 3 or 4 times. You know it. You know it. You know it because I'm saying you know it. Not because I'm not saying you know it and you're wrong about how you know it, but I'm hoping you'll not know that you're wrong. You know it because I'm telling you you know it. You don't even really know it. Anyway, it has long been known that Mr. Trump called Mr. Ralston, who held one of the most powerful positions in Georgia government after the 2020 elections, to try to persuade him to convene a special session of the state legislature. Now, the hope among Trump supporters was that lawmakers would be convinced of the fraud claims and vote to recognize a slate of pro-Trump electors rather than electors for Joseph R. Biden Jr. In 2023, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Mr. Ralston had recounted parts of the conversation to special grand jurors investigating the matter, including his recollection of the federal judge comment. And on the day after the Trump call, Mr. Ralston discussed it on an online show, saying the president's idea of holding a special session was, quote, very much an uphill battle. Of course, he says it in his southern drawl. The call to Mr. Ralston was also mentioned in the indictment handed up, right, by a grand jury in August of 2023. It formed the basis for one of the numerous overt acts listed in the indictment as helping advance the alleged racketeering conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election. And it was the basis for one of the original indictment's other criminal charges against Mr. Trump, the crime of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. This charge, it says parenthetically, was dismissed by the judge in the case in March of 2024. But the precise language and tenor of the conversation were not known until now. The recording demonstrates the many ways in which Mr. Trump courted multiple Republican officials in Georgia as he sought to find a way to overcome his loss. In a now famous call with Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's Secretary of State, on January 2nd, 2021, Mr. Trump said he wanted to, quote, find 11,780 votes, just enough to reverse the state results. And he suggested that Mr. Raffensperger could be Do you remember this part? He suggested that Mr. Raffensperger could be prosecuted criminally if he did not go along. A really early indication of his retributive bent, prosecuting his enemies, as Susie Wiles is thankfully willing to admit is the case with Letitia James, but not anybody else, of course. But this is an early indication of that. And that was one of the more surprising things at the time, and it's worth remembering now. He told Raffensperger, you don't want to get in the way of this. You're going to want to do the way I say it. Find the votes. In fact, you're under arrest if you don't, basically, is what he said. You could be criminally prosecuted. No, you can't. No, you can't. But if you do find the votes and you make Trump president, he could. Now, he might not want to because you helped him, but he might say, it took long. I had to stay on the phone a lot longer than I should have had to make you do this thing. You're under arrest. Could be. Wise idea. Don't hand him that power. Anyway, in this call to Mr. Ralston, Trump mostly buddied up to a fellow Republican, trying to convince him that his political fortunes would rise if he did what Mr. Trump was suggesting. However, he was dead in 2 years, so, what would be the point to that? But we didn't know that then. You're popular now, Mr. Trump said at one point in the recording, but you'll be more popular. Mr. Ralston appeared to entertain Mr. Trump's pitch, though it's not clear to what extent he had any intention of following through. That's funny. I like that. He told the president that he had talked to Rudolph W. Giuliani. You ever heard of him? Mr. Trump's personal lawyer at the time, and that his staff was studying the idea of a special session. We're looking at it. That's a very Trumpy answer, too. Mr. Ralston said on the call, I mean, Mr. President, I have not signed up with the governor or the lieutenant governor on their public statements, which have blown off the idea that there being any kind of recourse, whether it's a special session or no. He's distancing himself from the Republicans who have said no, but he's not saying yes. He was referring to Governor Brian Kemp and Jeff Duncan, the lieutenant governor at the time, both of whom were resisting calls for a special session. I march to my own drummer, Mr. Ralston continued, and my own drummer says that I want Donald Trump to remain the president. If there's any way that we can possibly help in that regard, I'm on board. And he thanks him, and I think he says, thank you, we won't forget this. They'll forget it. Ultimately, Mr. Ralston never publicly supported the idea of a special session. 77 seconds of the call were redacted, interestingly enough, in the recording provided to the Times. It wasn't immediately clear why, but a person with knowledge of the recording said they believed it happened around the time that Mr. Ralston's office turned the recording over to Ms. Willis's office. That is to say, I thought they were saying, well, at what point in the call did they begin the redaction? But it is the point. What they're actually saying is the redaction was probably added by Fannie Willis's office at some point. It still doesn't help clear up why, but it's interesting. The original indictment stated that Mr. Trump importuned Mr. Ralston to violate his oath of office by calling a special session of the state legislature for the purposes of unlawfully appointing presidential electors from the state of Georgia. Judge Scott McAfee of Fulton County Superior Court quashed that charge related to the call, arguing that prosecutors were not specific enough about what violations the defendants were pressuring public officials to commit. But the call remained a part of the charge, alleging that a racketeering conspiracy had been committed. In the call, Mr. Trump appeared to direct Mr. Ralston on how a special session would play out. If we had a special session, we will present and you'll say, here, it's been massive fraud. We're going to turn over the state. Well, that's some great specifics there, sir. It's interesting. He sometimes protects himself from criminal charges because he's not specific enough in what he's asking for, because he doesn't know how to be specific. I don't know. I just want you to get to this answer. Mr. Ralston, who hailed from the North Georgia mountains, often referred to himself as a country lawyer, but he was known as a sharp political operator keen on balancing the practical demands of the Georgia's business community with the fervent conservatism of the Republican base. In the recording, Mr. Ralston repeatedly voiced his support for Mr. Trump, but notably did not commit to a plan of action. As it became clear that Mr. Trump was trailing in Georgia recounts in 2020, some of his allies in the state Senate called for convening a special session. In a joint statement issued on December 7th, 2020, the date of Mr. Trump's call to Mr. Ralston, Mr. Kemp And Mr. Duncan said that calling a special session in order to select a separate slate of presidential electors is not an option that is allowed under state or federal law. That enraged Mr. Trump, who referred to Mr. Kemp as a stonehead on the call with Mr. Ralston and said of Mr. Duncan, "What a jerk he is." Despite Mr. Trump's endorsement of an opponent, Mr. Kemp won re-election in 2022. And Ralston died. So there you have it. 5 states pursued election-related inquiries after the 2020 election. They focused on efforts by Trump and his allies to deploy fake electors in 7 states that he lost, and alternatively to see if state lawmakers might overturn the vote during special sessions. While most of the inquiries have stalled or been dismissed, a Wisconsin judge ruled this week that felony charges against 2 Trump advisors should proceed to trial. So there you have it. It's on the record now. I don't know what difference it's going to make. Maybe none, but it's a great reminder of the evidence that had been amassed against him. And I guess I will say at this point, I don't know if I put any stories away about it because I was watching posts on Blue Sky purporting to be covering the closed-door hearing at which Jack Smith, the former special prosecutor, special counsel, was testifying to Congress, I guess, about the case that he had put together, the number of cases that he had put together against Trump, and, you know, the evidence that he had amassed, and I guess somebody in Congress was, in passing, interested in finding out what it was that they actually had on Trump. So I've got, let's see, there's a CNN story here. Jack Smith testifies in closed-door hearing that it was his decision to charge Trump. There's a Politico thing from today. Jack Smith's lawyers asked Jim Jordan, for open hearings after closed-door testimony, I guess, in front of, was it another House committee, or was it a Senate committee? I'll take a look at the CNN article, but the posts on Blue Sky from that day were just basically saying that Jack Smith was testifying to this panel. Oh, I had mountains of evidence. I had mountains and mountains of evidence that would have proven, I believe, beyond a reasonable doubt. We would have got a conviction. There's no question about it. We had the evidence to prove him guilty, but, you know, procedure got in the way, and the suicide pact of the Constitution got in the way. And the Supreme Court's declaration that, I don't know, whatever Donald Trump needs, he gets, got in the way as well. Jack Smith testifies in closed-door hearing that it was his decision to charge Trump, according to testimony obtained by CNN. That's not particularly startling. Of course it would be his decision. But the bigger story behind the story is, well, why did he make that decision? And that's because, although remember that Jack Smith comes from Republican world, he, you know, was following the evidence wherever it led, and without fear or favor, or whatever the hell the saying is. People at the Justice Department would have better knowledge of that. Former special counsel Jack Smith on Wednesday defended his criminal investigation into President Donald Trump in a closed-door deposition before the House Judiciary Committee as he faces scrutiny from Republican lawmakers. So that would be Jim Jordan's gig. But he closed the doors because he didn't want people to find out what Jack Smith was saying. And then here we are finding out what he said. They closed the doors, but that doesn't mean members can't go and tell people, or staffers can't go and tell people what happened. The decision to bring charges against President Trump was mine, but the basis for those charges rests entirely with President Trump and his actions, as alleged in the indictments returned by grand juries when people were given the evidence and they actually said, yes, let's charge people. Back in those days, 2 different grand juries decided to charge him, and in 2 different districts. Smith said in a portion of his opening statement obtained by CNN, Lanny Brewer, an attorney for Smith, continued to defend Smith's work after his deposition, which lasted more than 8 hours, wrapped. Oh, it was a deposition. I don't think I realized that. Okay, well, styled as a deposition, because what's actually happening with Republicans in control is they are investigating the investigators. And basically, investigators are telling them, I had him dead to rights, and you idiots got in the way. Any objective person who listened today to the deposition would know without any doubt that Jack Smith's investigation was based purely on the facts and the law and the evidence, nothing more, nothing less, Brewer said. Smith was called to testify about Trump's alleged mishandling and retention of classified documents, and his role in attempting to overturn the 2020 election, like two pretty serious things. According to sources familiar with the investigation, he was also seeking to clarify issues surrounding the use of phone records he subpoenaed of lawmakers Trump spoke with about the election scheme. I didn't choose those members. President Trump did, Smith said, according to the statements obtained by CNN. Remember that they're all up in arms now. How dare you surveil me? And Smith's answer to that is, hey, I didn't just pick you guys out of a hat and persecute you because you're such diehard Republicans. I had to follow where the evidence went. Trump was scheming to overturn the election and steal documents, and you're the people he called about that. Sorry, he's the one that put you in the hot seat, not me. But there may be details that Smith may not have been willing or able to testify about on Wednesday, such as parts of the second volume of his report around Trump's handling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, this source added. The high-stakes interview went on for hours and carried significant risk for Smith, since Trump has called for him to be prosecuted, but he called for Brad Raffensperger to be prosecuted too. And how Smith answered questions could carry risks with a federal judge in Florida, the Justice Department, and the Republican-controlled Judiciary Committee. Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, Ohio Republican, subpoenaed Smith to testify privately, accusing Smith of running a partisan and politically motivated probe of Trump and conducting abusive surveillance of lawmakers, among other things. Smith has continually denied that his work was politically motivated and said that he's willing to testify publicly regarding his investigations into Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago sex dungeon and the attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election culminating in the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot. The idea that politics would play a role in big cases like this, it's absolutely ludicrous and it's totally contrary to my experience as a prosecutor, Smith said during an interview in October with former federal prosecutor Andrew Weissman at the University College in London. There's plenty more, but I'm late already with the music, and we'll have to fix it in post, I guess. Too bad. And I wish it was the third one, because that's a lot easier to fix. Anywho, doesn't really matter that much. We'll read more about it here. But yeah, I mean, I guess the problem with anybody believing Smith on the House Judiciary Committee is they are all they're in the same position as always. Every Republican accusation is a confession. They would play politics, so everybody must be doing it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue with reading through the account of Jack Smith's testimony, his deposition before the House Judiciary Committee. But yeah, essentially the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee are aghast and accusing him of having prosecuted people purely for political retribution, which I guess ignores the fact that, again, like most special prosecutors, and FBI directors, for that matter, they come from the Republican ranks. And I guess this is just a time to renew the perennial complaint that we have. By the way, Democrats always jump out of the way on stuff like this. They are always having to clean up Republican messes and investigate Republican scandals. And they always say, well, we'll choose a Republican investigator here, a Republican special counsel, because then that person is unassailable. No one can say they're being partisan about it. And I mean, effing duh, how many times have we been through this already? But certainly no clearer example exists, right? You choose a Republican prosecutor. No one can accuse them of partisanship, unless, of course, they actually say we should indict a Republican president, in which case, guess what? They're going to say, of course you conducted a partisan investigation. And we're so sure of that we're going to initiate a congressional inquiry into how corrupt and partisan it was and accuse you of all the things that Democrats said that we could not accuse you of because you were a Republican. And by the way, I mean, I guess they're going to do this anyway, but I guess, one, if you name a Democrat, they'll definitely attack them. That's true. But as the case turns out, if you name a Republican, they'll definitely attack them too. Now, I guess it hasn't made a practical difference because I think most Democrats probably pretty much agree that Jack Smith did a pretty thorough job of investigating, though there are certainly, I mean, he moved with great dispatch, but there are probably Democrats who say, yeah, well, he did, he moved too slowly for my tastes, and in the end, there was no time for prosecuting. But I think he moved pretty quickly. And actually, more Democrats, I suppose, are mad at Merrick Garland for moving slowly than they are at Jack Smith for moving slowly, which is kind of interesting all by itself. And of course, I remind you that you should take a look at what Marcy Wheeler has written since forever on this. I don't know if she'd be really happy about being labeled a great defender of Merrick Garland's, but she's laid out the case pretty clearly that, there was good reason for what he was doing, and you can't just magically snap your fingers and have everybody indicted, even though it looked like Jack Smith moved a lot faster. A lot of that, I guess, in practical terms, happened because of what Merrick Garland was able to bulldoze out of the way for him. But no one's really happy cheering for Merrick Garland at this point, even Marcy. So anyway, it's complicated. I can't explain it all right now. Marcy can't even explain it all in one sitting either. But I just want to point out that, surrendering to the instinct to name a Republican as special prosecutor in terms of buying you protection from accusations that the investigation is politicized has never worked. Not once. Not for a second. Not only that, but no Democrat who engaged in that kind of cynical decision making has ever bothered, to my knowledge, to try to point out to the press, the public, or Republicans or anyone else, hey, you can't say this guy's conducting a partisan investigation. He's a Republican. As soon as he goes to work as a special counsel appointed by Democrats, Republicans don't consider him a Republican anymore. And even if they did, they would just say, well, he's a rhino. It doesn't matter. It's never worked. And nobody has ever even tried to make it work. So stop doing it, I guess. Now, they'll certainly accuse any Democrat of partisanship, but I don't know, maybe, by the way, I'm going to weave here. What are we afraid of? What are Democrats afraid of? What are Republicans afraid of in appointing somebody who's just, a normal by-the-books prosecutor, but just happens to be a Democrat and having been appointed to the Justice Department, let's say, at some point in the previous Democratic administration? What are we so afraid of? That they will prosecute them more pointedly, more rapidly, more sharply? And what's the big fear here? The Republican fear, of course, is that they'll make up the charges to get a partisan win. But since we have seen you accuse Republicans time and time again of somehow deciding all of a sudden to become a Democrat and invent charges for partisan reasons, even though you're not even part of that partisan group, I guess that doesn't matter. But if Democrats believe that there's any chance that a Democratic special counsel would do things differently or better, even from a partisan perspective, at this point, why aren't you trying it? Because you're never even bringing the point up, like on a TV talk show. Hey, he's a Republican. I've not seen anybody say that about Jack Smith or any of the others. I mean, going all the way back, because we know that it's the case with FBI directors, right? There are no Democratic FBI directors. There just haven't been. Because then they would be accused of politicizing the department. But with Jack Smith, with Robert Mueller, Republican guy. Everybody else, I mean, you name it. I don't think there's been a prominent special counsel that came from Democratic rank, like clearly partisan Democratic ranks. And in some cases, I mean, the big cases, they've been obviously Republican. Patrick Fitzgerald, Republican world. Robert Mueller, Republican world. Jack Smith, Republican world. You name it, it's all true. And almost nobody says, holy crap, what are you talking about? He's conducting a partisan investigation. Why, we specifically named a Republican so that couldn't be said. And yet here you are saying it anyway. Nobody even tries it. As far as you know what, there's probably somebody who's tried it and it's, brushed off and no one cares. which is amazing in itself. But if it was really true that nobody had tried it, certainly nobody has broken through with this as a response. It's such an ineffective point. You might question whether it's worth doing at some point. But, probably not in my lifetime. Anyway, as we were saying, Smith, a longtime public corruption prosecutor, was appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland in November of 2022 to oversee the investigations after Trump announced he was running for president again. And I guess the Republican logic, such as it is, well, he was appointed by Merrick Garland, and Merrick Garland is a Democrat in a Democratic administration, and so therefore it must be true that Smith is as well. No, in fact, he's not. He was reaching across the aisle to try to get someone who was unassailably fair, even though probably all the Democrats working in the Justice Department were also unassailably fair. In fact, every Democrat's biggest complaint about Merrick Garland was that he was taking too long because he was trying to be unassailably fair. Anyway, Smith brought criminal charges against Trump in 2023. The former president pleaded not guilty in both cases, and neither went to trial. The case on mishandling classified documents ended with District Judge Aileen Cannon, for God's sake. Oh my God, we have to nominate an unassailably fair special prosecutor. If only because we're going to end up in front of an unassailably partisan, incontrovertibly partisan judge. But what are you going to do? Judges. Anyway, they do point out that Aileen Cannon is a Trump appointee. And not only did Aileen Cannon not like the case that Smith brought because he was obviously partisan, but she nullified the whole case, saying that it was unconstitutional for there even to be a Jack Smith, or at least Jack Smith's office. Okay, sure. The 2020 election and the January 6th case was hamstrung by a landmark Supreme Court decision and dropped after Trump was reelected. Womp womp. Trump has continued to say that he did not do anything wrong on January 6th, and since taking office for a second term, he has pardoned over 1,000 people who have been charged in connection to that violent attack. What did the Republicans want? It says here, Jordan has said the Republicans are interested in how the investigation into Trump came to be, how the special counsel's office interacted with the bipartisan House Select Committee that investigated January 6th, and the efforts by investigators to obtain information about members of Congress related to the U.S. Capitol riot. Some of those efforts took place before Smith took over, when other established Justice Department offices and the FBI were running the investigations. Who was the director of the FBI? The last Republican, of course, left over from the Trump administration. And it doesn't even matter what the timing is because, as we've mentioned, all directors of the FBI are nominated by Republicans. And to the extent that Democrats have the opportunity to name directors, they usually name Republicans so that they can't be accused of partisanship, or just hold over the Republicans already in office because it's supposed to be a 10-year term in office and they don't fire them. In his letter to Smith demanding testimony, Jordan said he believed Smith's team had attempted to silence Trump about his case after charging him and abused investigative steps in their interactions with the defense counsel. However, many of those issues had been mediated in the court system. And guess what? None of that had any grounds in reality whatsoever. Of particular note, lawmakers have been learning more about private phone records of senators and congressmen that were collected during the early January 6th investigation called Arctic Frost. There's no predicate that we can find for the solicitation of these telephone records, which I think emphasizes the political weaponization that was behind this effort. And we're still getting more information. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, an Iowa Republican, said in October, lawmakers said that FBI Director Kash Patel showed them the subpoenas that were for toll records. The records showed phone numbers and the lengths of calls, but not the content of the calls. Smith addressed his use of toll records, which are a typical type of information gathered secretly during criminal investigations, according to sources familiar with the investigation. Toll records were lawfully subpoenaed and were relevant to complete a comprehensive investigation. January 6th was an attack on the structure of our democracy. in which over 100 heroic law enforcement officers were assaulted, by the way. Smith said, according to his opening statement obtained by CNN, over 160 individuals later pled guilty to assaulting police officers that day. Exploiting that violence, President Trump and his associates tried to call members of Congress in furtherance of their criminal scheme, urging them to further delay certification of the 2020 election. And so, obviously, he's like, well, who did he call? I want to know. That's important. That's why he got the information. The Judiciary Committee on Tuesday also demanded interviews with 4 additional officials who worked with Smith on his investigation and were involved in subpoenaing phone records for several members of Congress. Smith also said in portions of the opening statement obtained by CNN that he would have conducted his investigation regardless of the president's political party. Oh, no. GOP Representative Kevin Kiley spoke with reporters near the end of Smith's testimony, saying that while he spent a limited amount of time in the hearing, he was able to attend Smith's testimony today, and he did not observe anything that was unprofessional. Kiley suggested it was time to move on from Smith's investigations. After a while, we're talking about events from years ago. You investigate the investigators and the best people who investigated the investigators. What? Excuse me? After a while, we're talking about events from years ago. You investigate the investigators and the best people who investigated the investigators. I don't know what that's okay. You can just continue adding an item and at some point kind of where does it end? Maybe we should move on. No, but all right. Well, maybe you should stop investigating the investigators anyway. How far Smith goes will be scrutinized. Smith's team released a 137-page final report on the probe before Trump was sworn into office for a second term, but Cannon has previously prohibited the release of details from Volume 2 and blocked it from being shared with Congress. Sources familiar with the investigation also said that Smith will be restricted from answering any questions regarding grand jury materials, citing that grand jury secrecy still applies even after the jury has completed its work. The Justice Department had given Smith's legal team some guidance on what he can answer in advance of the deposition. This Justice Department did? Wow. According to a person familiar with the situation. However, what happens to Smith may not be up to him, given the makeup of the Republican-led committee and the Trump White House and Justice Department. If he declines to answer certain questions, lawmakers could accuse him of obstruction and ask the Justice Department to launch a criminal probe. If Smith allegedly divulges too much and violates grand jury secrecy or reveals confidential details without authorization, he could risk blowback from the Justice Department or federal judge. And I guess I want to clarify this by saying they put it in terms of like, oh, what if Congress obeys norms and rules here? They could find that he revealed too much. But keep in mind that they could also find, he was fine. But if we say he revealed too much, even if we failed to ever get anybody to indict him for it, no grand jury will agree to the charges. If we say he revealed too much and try to bring him up on charges, that will be a news cycle. And it'll all be about how, see, I told you Jack Smith was breaking the law. Well, nobody will indict him for it. Well, that's because, of course, we're in Democrat blue city or whatever. They just blame it on something like that. I mean, they'll get the news cycle out of it, and that's what they want. Taking the fifth does not mean a person has committed a crime. It means that person is concerned that their testimony might be used against them. Eli Honig, a CNN senior legal analyst, said in the Situation Room on Wednesday, it certainly looks bad. Did somebody do it? I don't know. It certainly looks bad, and it gives a negative impression. Republican members of this committee have made much of the fact that Jack Smith's deputies have taken the fifth. Okay. But meanwhile, of course, Donald Trump took the fifth, 70-something times in his trial, even while telling everybody before, only criminals who are trying to hide something take the fifth. Another special counsel lawyer asked federal judge for help is the next section here. Several of Smith's special counsel's office's investigators have appeared for testimony behind closed doors on Capitol Hill already. The Judiciary Committee has already made a criminal referral on one special counsel's office deputy, Thomas Wyndham, for allegedly obstructing the congressional investigation when he declined to answer some questions. Wyndham struggled with the guidance from the Justice Department on what to answer to the House committee, and even went to the chief judge of the federal district court in Washington, D.C. for guidance before his second round of testimony. What do you know? He thought this Justice Department was giving him bad guidance. Judge James Boasberg, of course, that's the chief in the federal district court in D.C. He suggested at one point Windham may want to decline to answer questions about his work with Trump's grand juries by asserting his Fifth Amendment rights. I certainly understand Windham's lawyer and Mr. Windham's desire not to be stuck between the horns of the dilemma, as you said, that he could be prosecuted either way, Boasberg said in a hearing, according to a transcript obtained by CNN of the previously unreported hearing. Classified documents, prosecutor Jay Bratt also declined to answer questions in a deposition by asserting his Fifth Amendment protection from self-incrimination. Democrats, it says here, want Smith's testimony to be public. That's the next section. 2 hours into Smith's testimony, several Democratic lawmakers told reporters outside a hearing room that his testimony should be made public. Chairman Jordan made an excellent decision in not allowing Jack Smith to testify publicly, because had he done so, it would already have been absolutely devastating to the president and all the president's men involved in the insurrectionary activities of January the 6th, said Jamie Raskin. Pramila Jayapal said that she asked Smith what the impact of democracy, I guess, would be if someone interfered with an election, to which she said Smith answered it would be catastrophic. Okay. The Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee have continually said that Smith should be allowed to testify publicly, saying the American people should hear what Smith has to say. The only reason that Donald Trump did not go to trial was not convicted is because of the Supreme Court and because of the timing of it and him becoming president. Dan Goldman told reporters he's guilty of those two indictments and no bias or anything was ever involved. Well, that's probably flatly true. Anyway, just wanted to keep you up to date on what happened there and what was going on, and use it as another reminder that Democrats have never won even a minute's reprieve and never leveraged for themselves a single effective talking point even from agreeing that, oh, well, in order to avoid charges of bias, we should keep nominating Republicans to these jobs. However, I will say it's really is probably likely that they would get no further in nominating Democrats to the job. The Democrats would be walking on eggshells and maybe proceeding, along Merrick Garland's lines. It might ironically be better for them to nominate Republicans who think, for whatever reason, though there's no basis for it, no evidence this has ever been the case, that they would not be viewed as partisan actors. But they seem convinced that they wouldn't be, so maybe they proceed faster for that reason. Not always the case, though. Mueller certainly walked on eggshells when it was his turn. All right. Just thought that was important to put on the record, I guess. All right. Let's see. Other things that I have in store for you. Yes. All right. That one we already addressed. And all right, I'm not sure where to go with next, but I will save this other thing for the next segment. How about this? We'll read a little bit before the break. We might be able to get this one in. Charlie Savage is writing in the New York Times, and that's always important, what's going on. I mentioned to you there were more strikes against more boats. I think these were in the Pacific, which I guess starts to raise the question, what the hell are you doing over there in the Pacific, right? Venezuela has no Pacific coast, right? Their only coastline is on the Caribbean. And, just in thinking about this stuff, like basically the boats that they seem to be targeting in the Pacific, I guess, I don't even know if I have all the specifics because there's so many boats involved at this point. And I've seen some maps about where the locations are, and it's a pretty wide-ranging area. But presumably this is all, and it is, again, it's a huge benefit of the doubt to the Trump administration to say, well, they're drug boats. They show no evidence, and I don't know why that is, right? The boat that everyone was concerned with, the September 2nd boat with the second strike, the two survivors, well, they're climbing up on the overturned hull of a piece of the boat, but they could be continuing in the fight because that piece of junk floating in the water is still floating. So they could be fighting from that platform, says, the administration. And then they were pointing out, well, and by the way, the reason it's still floating is because of the cocaine that's packed in the hull there. It seems like that would be the opposite, but okay. And we said there's just some evidence that they pack a little bit of air in these things so that they do float, because they don't want them to sink to the bottom of the ocean even if they have to chuck them overboard to avoid being captured with them, or they get blown up. I don't think anybody was counting on being blown up until now. But okay, do the packages float? Yes. It would be enough to float a wrecked hull, half of a boat? Nah, probably not. There's air pockets and things, but that doesn't mean it can float anything, right? But if the drugs float in 25, 35 strikes now, they're blowing up boats. They can't recover one brick of this cocaine that's supposedly so buoyant that it can hold a half a boat up with two guys on top of it. I don't know. They just haven't. And it would be so easy to convince most people, including me. If you basically were saying, we think there's cocaine being trafficked from Colombia, because we all think there's cocaine being trafficked from Colombia, and we're sinking it out here. Is it illegal? Does it make the strikes correct? No. But at least, it would be the hardest thing to convince me of is that you've blown up 20 boats from Colombia and found zero cocaine. What's up with that? And in addition to all of this, Trump's focus is entirely on Venezuela. But it's the same operation. We're blowing up boats in the Pacific because Venezuela is bad. No, there's no Venezuela in the Pacific. Why aren't they just saying, and also Colombia is? And if you want to be aiming at regime change in Venezuela, do you think that people know enough to say, well, but it's a different situation in Colombia. We don't want regime change there. No, you could sell people on regime change in Colombia too. The people who would buy regime change in Venezuela anyway, half the country would say, enough with the regime change already. But anyway, what is Charlie Savage writing about? Trump relies on distortions to support his pressure campaign on Venezuela. So why not have distortions for a pressure campaign on Colombia? That's not answered here. But if you want to know what specifically type of garbage is being used in the campaign against Venezuela, it's here. The president has a long record of making false or misleading statements, period, about everything. But the sheer density of them in his administration's boat attacks and Venezuela pressure campaign is exceptional, says Charlie Savage, who is in a position to know. In justifying his administration's boat strikes and its mounting pressure campaign on Venezuela, President Trump has regularly relied on assertions that distort the circumstances, carry contradictions, and twist language. Mr. Trump says an armed conflict, quote unquote, armed conflict, makes the killings of people on these vessels lawful. But law of war experts say standards for a war to exist are not met. So no, there's no armed conflict. The administration acts like a Venezuelan slang term for soldiers corrupted by drug money. I've been trying to reiterate this point every time it comes up. The administration acts like a Venezuelan slang term for soldiers corrupted by drug money. That term, Cartel de los Soles, is an actual cartel. It has recast drugs as a weapon and trafficking them as terrorism. There's 15 logical leaps here, none of which have any basis in reality, all piggybacking on one another, all bootstrapping with one another in order to come to the so-called conclusion that we're at war. So therefore, it's all okay. The core argument for using armed force? Well, overdoses caused by fentanyl coming from Mexico. That's what's at stake here. The target of the strikes? Boats suspected of carrying cocaine from South America, not fentanyl. A Venezuelan president's alleged involvement in drug trafficking? Intolerable. A former president of Honduras convicted in a U.S. court for doing the exact same thing? Pardoned by Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump has a long record of making false or misleading statements, but the sheer density of them, it is repeated here, in his administration's boat attacks and Venezuela pressure campaign has been exceptional. The pattern traces back to February, when, on Mr. Trump's orders, Secretary of State Marco Rubio designated, that's an important term, 8 Latin American drug cartels and criminal groups as terrorist organizations, including Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan prison gang. Since then, the Trump team has insisted on calling such groups and their suspected members narco-terrorists. As a matter of plain English, terrorists are zealots who use violence to advance some ideological or religious cause. Drug cartels are unscrupulous businesses seeking profits by supplying an illicit product despite a ban. Okay, so they're like, entirely different things and all that stuff. In March, Mr. Trump declared that he could invoke a wartime deportation law against Venezuelans suspected of being in Tren de Aragua and summarily deport them to a notorious prison in El Salvador because, he said, Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, was directing that gang to carry out an, quote, invasion. But the United States intelligence agencies believe the opposite. Isn't that curious? We'll return to this after this break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David, still your host for the Kagro in the Morning Show after all these years. Thank you for all your continuing support for the show. And if you're listening regularly and still thinking about getting on board as a supporter, well, the time is now. Patreon.com is the easiest way to make recurring subscription-style payments every month, all year round, to keep us going. patreon.com/KagroX brings you to our page where you can sign up with your monthly support. And hey, have you seen our clever new subscription tiers? It's easier than ever to sign up for, say, one crisp dollar bill for every information-packed 2-hour show. If you're the plan ahead type, there's even a year-long subscription program that saves you 15% on the cover price. Or it would if there was a cover price, or even a cover, for that matter. patreon.com/KAGROX. Thanks again for all your support. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We got one more segment left, and, it'll have to be jam-packed, because that's the way it is. I can't abandon reading Charlie Savage. It would be a disservice at this point. But again, just to lay the foundation of where we left off, back in March, Trump declares that he can invoke a wartime deportation law, the Alien Enemies Act, against Venezuelans suspected, in his mind anyway, anybody he can convince other people to say is suspected of being in Tren de Aragua. That's basically what's going on. Why? How come you can deport them? Because they're alien enemies. How come they're alien enemies? Because Nicolas Maduro, he says, was directing Tren de Aragua to carry out an invasion. And of course, this is piggybacking on rhetoric that the right wing has been using for years, that any migration to the United States, legal or illegal at this point, is really an invasion. But it really isn't. Just as cocaine isn't really a weapon. You can't even throw it at people and hurt them with it. You have to convince them to ingest it. It's not much of a weapon, really. That's not a weapon. Cartel de los Soles is not a cartel. It's just slang. And migration isn't an invasion. But United States intelligence agencies believe the opposite with respect, not to whether or not there's an invasion, but they do believe the opposite with respect to that too. But they believe that Tren de Aragua is not subject to Maduro's control. It is, in fact, they say, at odds with his government and lacks the organization to effectively obey orders. And while federal courts said that they did not have the stability to the ability, well, they also don't have stability, to second guess Mr. Trump's assertion that the gang was an arm of Maduro's government. That's just one of the limitations they impose on themselves. Presidents get to determine stuff. We give them that latitude because normally we have this big screening process whereby the public, assesses your mental stability and capabilities and chooses only people, who demonstrate the ability to lead the country effectively. But in this case, we just did the opposite. We gave a crazy person the ability to make presidential determinations. And now courts say, we can't second guess that. He was elected. Well, under normal circumstances, sure. But okay. So They have since ruled that illegal immigration was simply not, though, a wartime invasion. They were confident enough to be able to say that. So the deportation law did not apply. So therefore, those deportations were illegal and unconstitutional. What are you going to do about it now, though? I don't know. In July, the Treasury Department formally designated, again, like, let's just say it. And what did they do? They designated that fake thing, the Cartel de los Soles, as a terrorist organization, despite the fact that it isn't real and doesn't exist and isn't a cartel, and declared Mr. Maduro to be its leader. Last month, the State Department did the same. Based on that, the administration routinely calls Mr. Maduro a cartel leader. But don't look at me. I didn't make it up. The State Department believes it. The Treasury Department also said it. Well, they said it because they know that you would have them thrown out of the window in Kiev if they didn't. And also, they're stupid and crazy, and they just want to make you look like you know what you're doing, but you don't. There's no Cartel de los Soles involved. It's slang. All right, whatever. And he explains it again here. Remember, again, this is all bootstrapping. Now we're going to designate the Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization. And because Maduro is its head, he's the chief terrorist. But Cartel de los Soles does not refer to a real drug cartel. It is a slang term in Venezuela, dating back to the 1990s for military officials who take bribes from drug traffickers. And it is essentially a pejorative way of talking about the Venezuelan government as unusually corrupt. So it's a bit of an inside joke. And they were like, it says cartel. Okay. Now, this logic, again, never works when you say things like, well, actually, the elite troops that were fighting in Iran, Iraq, wherever was it, who had the Republican Guard? Was it the Iraqis? Well, this regime is Republican. No. Things don't work like that until you need them to work like that, as with the Cartel de los Soles. Also in July, Mr. Trump sent an order to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, whom the administration refers to as Secretary of War. It says it right here. The order instructed Mr. Hegseth to begin targeting drug smuggling boats tied to cartels in international waters with lethal force. And now we know what that means. On September 2nd, the military attacked the first such boat. It was carrying 11 people who Mr. Trump said were members of Tren de Aragua. Mr. Trump also released a video showing one strike, suggesting a simple and clean operation. Mr. Trump told Congress the attack was self-defense. But it turned out the vessel had been headed to a place associated with transshipment to Europe and had turned back, apparently spooked by a military aircraft before the attack began, raising the question of how it posed any imminent threat. It also turned out that there had been multiple strikes on the vessel, not just the one shown in the video, and a follow-up one killed 2 initial survivors. You know the story. The men had climbed aboard the capsized hull and waved as a surveillance plane circled overhead, thinking it might, rescue them, before an admiral ordered a second strike. Even in an armed conflict, it is a war crime to kill shipwrecked sailors who are out of the fight. In briefings to Congress, the admiral justified the second strike by contending the men could have been communicating with narco-terrorists, but then conceded that there were no other boats around and no sign that they had radios. People familiar with the briefing said he is also said to have argued that some of the suspected load of cocaine might have remained under the hull, in which case what he called a weapon was still present, right? Now, if you're willing to say, no, cocaine's really a weapon, right? He's going for a weapon. He's still got a weapon, so you shoot him. Well, but the weapon is not a weapon. But we declare it to be a weapon. Well, that's a lot different. Like to say there's a gun in the guy's waistband, and of course sometimes there's not, so they plant the gun there. But what if they don't even bother planting they plant cocaine there? Well, did you know this was cocaine and not a gun? Yes. So then why did you shoot him? What did you think he was going to do? Make you snort it? Are you going to hit you over the head with it? What? No, it's a weapon. How so? Well, he could have drawn it from his waistband, packaged it for retail sale on the street, sold it to people, but sold them too much. Then they could have overdosed on it and they would be, but wait a second. The threat here is to either the police in the gun in the waistband scenario, or to members of our military where they can fight back from this position claim, right? But none of these weapons can be deployed against the person who's supposed to be making an arrest here, an interdiction of some kind. The threat is to their lives. That's why they're supposed to be authorized to respond with deadly force. But if the weapon they have requires shipment to the United States and then retail sale on the streets to someone other than the police or military members confronting them, then there's no risk to them, and the shoot is a bad one. But all of that is getting glossed over. In mid-September, Mr. Trump's counterterrorism advisor tried another argument. He maintained that because the administration had labeled the cartels foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs, look, the label was made. Well, then it's legal to use the military force against them. But the law that enables such a designation, the one they point to, is actually about cutting off financing and support for such groups. It does not authorize military attacks on them. As that came under challenge, officials shifted to using a different term for the cartels and gangs whose suspected members they said the military could lawfully kill. DTOs, not FTOs. FTOs are foreign terrorist organizations. DTOs are designated terrorist organizations. That term is invented and does not come from law. Oh, it's illegal for us to kill these people because they're FTOs. FTO designation doesn't mean we have the right to use military force against them. Well, then they're not FTOs. They're DTOs. What's a DTO? I don't know. I just made it up. Look over there. Boom. Look, they're dead. They're not going to become undead now. So we win. But what's a DTO? I don't know. What's a Cartel de los Soles? After a second boat attack, the administration told Congress that Mr. Trump had, quote, determined, oh no, another determination, determined that the United States was in a formal armed conflict with drug cartels and that boat crews were combatants, not civilians, whom it would be murder or a war crime to target. So that's good. We got that out of the way. It is difficult to find anyone knowledgeable in armed conflict law outside of this administration who actually agrees. People do not lose civilian status by committing crimes. Cocaine is an illegal recreational drug, not a gun or a bomb, and shipping it to American consumers who want to buy it may be a crime, but it is not an armed attack. Pressed for what can justify the extrajudicial killings of suspected drug smugglers, the Trump administration has cited a rise in overdose deaths over the past decade. But that surge, which, by the way, started to ebb after 2023, was largely caused by fentanyl, which is made in labs in Mexico using precursor chemicals from China. The United States is attacking boats from South America, which Mexico is not in, by the way, that are carrying cocaine, assuming the intelligence justifying the strikes is even accurate. The Trump administration has also said the United States can use armed force in the collective self-defense of countries like Colombia and Mexico, whose security forces sometimes have shootouts with cartel gunmen. But a nation has to request assistance before another may use force in its collective self-defense. Rather than ask the United States to blow up the boats, the presidents of both of the countries have condemned the strikes. I was just going to say, ask them not to. But yeah, they've also condemned the strikes, in case that matters to anyone. A major justification for the administration's vow to push Mr. Maduro from power is that in 2020, he was indicted on charges of conspiring to export cocaine to the United States. But, of course, 3 weeks ago, Trump pardoned the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had, in fact, been found guilty last year of conspiring to export cocaine to the United States on a vast scale. On December 15th, Mr. Trump signed an executive order designating fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Sure, just do it. But that term has a legal meaning. A chemical, biological, or radiological weapon or explosive capable of killing many people in a mass casualty incident. Last year, about 48,000 Americans who ingested illegal drugs died from overdoses in which fentanyl played a role, but those were individual deaths, not a mass casualty event. Now they'll say, what's the difference? Dead Americans. How can you defend killing those Americans? If it's slow poisoning versus radiological bomb, what's the difference? That their individual deaths is a misnomer, they might add. But, you could make the same argument. Well, I don't understand why you keep insisting that they're individual events with the gun plague that we have here in the country, even when people do every day die in mass events along with them. But the slow poisoning of America through lead poisoning, that doesn't apply for some reason. Because we love guns, but hate drugs. But in fact, we love drugs just as much as we love guns. Anyway, we just don't admit it. On Tuesday, Mr. Trump declared on social media, like using the legislature, but different, that U.S. naval forces around Venezuela would enforce lots of capital letters, all capital letters, total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil vessels. Wait a minute, oil? How did that get into it? A blockade, of course, we are reminded, is an act of war. So the declaration drew dramatic headlines. We're at war. And now a war for what? Oil? No blood for oil, no war for oil. Oh, oil. I thought it was fentanyl or cocaine or maybe all of them. I don't know. The point is we're at war. But the term also means something specific. Blocking all vessels from entering or leaving an enemy nation's ports. A threat to intercept a handful of tankers that were, by the way, already penalized for their role in helping sell Iranian oil. Leaving other vessels free to transit is a law enforcement operation and not a blockade. But of course, Trump, there would be no way for him to differentiate between them. I like blockade. It's a great word. We're going to use that one. But it scares people because it's an act of war. Be precise. But what does he care? He cares nothing about any of this or the effective governance of the United States. I'll quickly mention that I saw circulated on Blue Sky a piece at MS Now, as they're now calling it, by Hayes Brown, who's fantastic and, shares a lot of great stuff and very often cited by Darwin. And he's sometimes read a couple of Hayes Brown's pieces, I think, right? But at any rate, even if I'm wrong about that, he points out an interesting thing, which would be interesting all by itself. I just want to use it for a discussion point. The title of the piece, Stephen Miller's push to attack alleged drug boats that we're talking about here is primed to backfire. Of course it is. Why specifically does Hayes Brown think so? The architect of Trump's deportation policy reportedly kicked off a string of attacks on boats near Venezuela to keep migrants from wanting to head north. But so I guess it was supposed to be, well, we'll kill you if you head north. Yes, no, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's probably part of the message, but I think it's not necessarily that it's designed to backfire or that it will backfire. I think he means for it to be a declaration that we're going to kill people migrating to the United States, and we're not trying to discourage it. Now, what Hayes, I think, is saying here, let him say it. The Trump administration has now killed almost 100 people in a string. They've now killed more than 100, I think. A string of military attacks against boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. While officials claim the attacks are to prevent the flow of deadly fentanyl into America, the overall goals of the campaign are muddled at best. But according to the Washington Post, the, quote, war against suspected narcotics smugglers, the brainchild of White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, began as an effort to curb immigration to the United States. Miller's larger vision was to reduce the flow of drugs and migrants into the United States, according to one of the former U.S. officials who spoke to the Post. Since then, the campaign has morphed into a potential war for regime change in Venezuela. And in a bit of cruel irony, what reportedly began as Miller's scheme to reduce migration may provoke even more people to flee north toward presumed safety in the United States. War causes refugees, period. Adding a military campaign on top of Venezuela's ongoing problems would only force more people to leave. So he's pointing out the irony, of escalating this to the level of war is going to cause people to flee Venezuela, and they're going to flee northward. And so there you go. It's backfired. If you wanted to stem the flow of migration to the United States from Venezuela, you're creating conditions that will in fact lead to more such migration. But I caution you that does not upset Stephen Miller, because it is his intention to murder those people before they get here. And that will be very, personally, viscerally, sexually exciting to him. I'm telling you. He wants that to happen. And he wants the opportunity to kill more such people on their way there. And if they make it here, he might not yet be ready to say we should just machine gun them in the streets. But rounding them up and being cruel to them and then deporting them back to someplace where we'll bomb them to death later is also very exciting. I think it's a win-win situation for Stephen Miller. He does not mind if it actually drives higher migration numbers, because that's an opportunity to kill more of them on the way here. Ultimately, we're going to get to this point. We've discussed this in the past. We're making American political response and intervention is making things untenable in some of these countries, and you just got to try to escape to get out of the way of the bombs, if not the bombs coming from your own corrupt government, the bombs of the United States government uncorrupting them by killing them and installing other people instead, or climate change for that matter, making it untenable. We cannot survive even as subsistence farmers in this region anymore. Climate change is making it impossible. Or we can't find jobs for those of us who are not involved in farming. The conditions are such that there's no other choice but to try to escape. And the threat to them is an existential one. We'll die out here unless you let us within your walls. And we're having to decide, eventually we'll have to decide, the wall can only keep a certain number of people out. We're going to have to decide at some point, are we the kind of country that machine guns people as they approach the border, or are we not? We like to think not. Stephen Miller wants to help change that. What if we are, though? What if we should be? And no better way to demonstrate it than to say anybody coming from Venezuela is a narco-terrorist. We're going to bomb the crap out of them so that they flee, and then we'll say, look, narco-terrorists, how can we tell? They're brown. Machine gun them. Kill them. Round them up if they make it past us. I don't think he's upset by that. I don't think he's going to be worried that it's quote-unquote backfiring. No, he's happy. More migrants means more targets, and they'll just shoot them down. Okay. Now, I know it's the end of the show. We don't have time for the other things we want to do. It's Friday. December 19th. I told you that at the beginning of the show. Why is that important? Friday, December 19th is the expiration of the 30-day period that the Department of Justice has under law to release, quote-unquote release, the quote-unquote Epstein files. How are they doing? I haven't seen any big announcements so far. I haven't been, closely monitoring Blue Sky or anything, but I haven't seen anybody saying, we got it, here it is, everybody, the files, let's go read them, and dividing it up into pieces and having everybody go take care of it. They probably have to the end of the day, but I think that's weekend chaos coming for you. And of course, will they release it? I don't know. They may just flatly go, well, I don't know. I don't know why you all thought we were going to do it, but 30 days is up and nope, we're not doing it. Or, of course, they could release something completely different and say, this is the Epstein files. Oh, my God, it says Sleepy Joe Biden was doing the whole thing. Or it could be the heavily redacted Epstein files, the real files. They just scratch the names out of everything. I don't know. Or anywhere in between. Or, again, I'm going to say it twice. They might just say, What are you going to do if we violate the law? Arrest us? Prosecute us? You can't. And we won't help. So go F yourselves. That's the end of it. So anyway, that'll make for an exciting Friday. Hey, look. Schoolie over at Blue Sky does say something's going on. Politico. Oh, he says lawless gonna lawless. Politico.com. DOJ won't meet Friday deadline to release all the Epstein files. I can't believe that that's happening. And I guess, is there an article for it? I guess we better read it. DOJ won't meet Friday deadline to release all the Epstein files. I can't believe it. Oh no. The delay means the White House is in apparent conflict with the law. Yeah. That President Donald Trump signed. What a hypocrite. In November. Yep. What do you know? The Department of Justice will not be releasing all of its files on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein by Friday's deadline, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said on Friday morning. Of course, I said it the minute they propose the legislation, but what are you going to do? Well, you got to try anyway, right? I'm not saying don't try. In an interview with Fox News, Blanche said the department would, quote, release several 100,000 documents today, but he acknowledged Friday's release would not encompass all the DOJ's documents for the investigation into the late financier. Yada, yada. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not going to read you the rest of the thing. I'll give you the citation, but there you have it. I told you that this Friday they would fail to meet the deadline for Epstein. Next Friday we'll have failed to meet the deadline for everybody getting their $1,776 checks if you're in the military. And it was a humbug to begin with, if you don't mind my saying so. And those checks aren't going to show. The Trump administration is setting themselves up for two gigantic failures, as viewed by groups that might arguably be considered to be big Trump supporters. MAGA and QAnon, presumably goes crazy, but, maybe not. Maybe they've changed their mind. Maybe they've become accustomed to the fact that they're not going to get what they want. The military guys may or may not even have known that they were going to get basic assistance with housing checks at all, and they may not even know anything about the 1776 thing either, because you had to watch the speech in order to know about that. Anyway, though they are not going to release these files today, that doesn't mean that Epstein stuff isn't in the news. There was just a big piece the other day that we didn't read, which is huge, and that's probably part of why we didn't read it, in the New York Times. And just so you know where to go in case somehow you've missed this thing, Don's best friend. That's the quote. How Epstein and Trump bonded over the pursuit of women. The president, the subheader says, has tried to minimize their friendship, but documents and interviews reveal an intense and complicated relationship. Chasing women was a game of ego and dominance. Female bodies were currency. Yuck. But we knew that. And when they say female bodies were currency, I mean, that's a very descriptive term. And I don't know how much they get into this thing. But as I mentioned, Paolo Zampoli earlier in the day, because he's in everything, literally in everything that Trump does, right? So he's on the board of the Kennedy Center as well. Selling passports all over the place, living in Trump Tower, I think, for some time. But he was one of the guys that gave Trump the idea to say, I'll tell you what, if you want a bunch of hot young models to feel like they have to, service you with sex, then what you need to do is create economic leverage over them. Why don't you start a modeling agency? Not because you need to bring art to the world, but because you need to be able to have cover for importing young women, and in some cases girls, from overseas and hold them hostage essentially by revoking their passport and making them live dormitory style in buildings that you happen to own in New York City. And what do you do with them? Is there any evidence that Trump, well, sure, there's evidence that Trump prevailed upon these girls. People make accusations about it all the time, and some of them are long-standing. But they keep saying, well, there's no evidence in the Epstein files that he did anything illegal except just super gross. Okay, let's hear about the super gross. You will over the weekend. I am sure of it. This article reveals lots of it. But remember, he established a modeling agency, basically really so that he would have a stable of hot young girls that he could bring to Trump parties and functions to, even if he wasn't indulging himself, like he stayed away from the alcohol, he wanted to be able to provide that at least atmosphere to the weirdo men that he invited to all of his, strange parties. And yeah, that's why female bodies were in fact currency. And then at some point, one of the things that was released in the Epstein files and made it out already was the big joke, the big novelty check of Donald Trump. Was it? I don't know who was buying what from whom, but one fully depreciated female. No, really. When they say currency, they mean it. This piece was put together by Nicholas Confessori and Julie Tate. It is enormous. You should read it. It does not make for good morning reading. There's all sorts of references in here that are going to turn your stomach, but you're going to feel like you need to have. And you'll have to live with this as a substitute for the Epstein files, because that stuff ain't coming. Why not? Because, it makes Trump look bad, and he's in control of everything, and it doesn't matter that there was a law, and it doesn't matter that he signed it. Okay, he's a huge hypocrite. Congratulations. Wonderful. We're just accustomed to that at this point. Anyway, there's lots for you to sort out from that one. You should take a look at it. I can't even, I don't even want to really, frankly, give you a flavor for what's in there. It's everything you thought it would be. That's all I can tell you. All right. It's time now for us to wrap things up at this point. Is there anything else that I need to say? Oh, well, there's also this. Oh, yes, right. I guess I'll give you this tidbit for the weekend. Another thing that you're going to have to read about on your own at this point, but also reported in the Washington Post the other day. We have to check in with the courts every once in a while. The appeals court in D.C. hands Trump a win. Oh, no. Over D.C. National Guard deployment. We just found out that in Los Angeles, that's over with, thanks to the courts there. Though they may defy the law there, too. I don't know. But here, judges wrote in a preliminary order that the National Guard can stay for now and that the Trump administration is likely to succeed in its appeal of a lower court ruling. And I think it all sort of hinges on the fact that D.C. is not a state. And that's basically what they're saying here. Well, deploying the National Guard troops, federalized National Guard troops to a federal district is allowable, at least according to two Trump appointees on the panel, in a way that doing this in a sovereign state, would not be. Although it's not entirely clear that these two judges wouldn't rule differently if D.C. were a state. That's what they're hanging their hat on for the moment. We'll see if we can't come to understand that in the weekend chaos just a little bit better. But as we are now embarked on the weekend cast from my standpoint, don't forget that Justice Putnam will be clearing some of these things up and reporting on new angles and new stories on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next, right here on Netroots Radio, and we'll see what we can't cram in after this.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, here's what's up at the top of his report. Republicans abandoned Trump in D.C. as they shut down Congress on the day Trump feared the most, when the Epstein files are required to be released by law, except it won't, as required by the king. Well, no surprise there. Plus an examination of the garbage coming out of CBS under Barry Weiss. Stay tuned. We'll see you next week.